Well, thank you all for coming to the second installment in the latest series in lecture and film. This year focusing on the theme Black Atlantic cinema. And this is actually the first installment in which we are privileged to welcome a guest to the Film Museum to talk to us about the film Little Senegal. I just want to say a couple of little things about the print before I welcome our guest Boukary Sawadogo to the pulpit. It's a film. Sometimes in film history there are films where there's a kind of historical gap where perhaps 20, 30 years ago you think, oh yeah, that should be a really easy film to find. But it's not the case. And this was not the case here. There's actually only one place in Europe that has a copy of the film, namely Belgium. We had a print sent to us that was then lost in the mail. You'd think, it's a 35mm print, big thing, so you'd think that wouldn't be easily lost, but apparently it was. Luckily, a substitute print has arrived. So we do get to screen it in 35mm the way it was seen in theaters during its original release. So it's a real, today a real privilege, I think. Because it's a copy coming from Belgium, this means that it has French and Flemish subtitles. So just a warning about that. Most of the dialogue is in English. There's a small section in French at the beginning of the film that will have live subtitles that we'll be projecting to aid those of you in the audience who are not well versed in either French or Flemish. So that was just a couple of words about the print of Little Senegal. I do though now want to talk a little bit about our guest, Boukary Sawadogo, who's had an incredible life trajectory, let's say. He was born in Côte d'Ivoire but moved to Burkina Faso as a child and lived both there and in Senegal before decamping to the United States for his studies, doing a master's at Iowa and then a PhD at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette. In 2015, he then joined the Faculty of Cinema Studies and Black Studies at the City College of New York, where he's now an associate professor. Boukary's research focuses on African cinema in general, but also particularly documentary cinema and, let's say, the Black world experience. His early focus in his research was on Francophone African cinema, which led to publications such as his French-language monograph Le Cinéma Francophone West Africain from 2013, and then in 2018 he actually published essentially the kind of, I guess, the authoritative introduction to African film studies. More recently, he has come out with West African Screen Media Comedy TV Series and Transnationalization in 2019 and Africans in Harlem, an Untold New York Story in 2022. He also has, alongside his kind of academic work, a range of different activities under his belt. He made the documentary Salut Y'all, African Teachers on the Bayou in 2013, and more recently has been organizer of the African Animation Film Festival that takes place in Harlem every year, where he also lives. So he's definitely well versed, let's say, both on a scholarly level and a biographical or quotidian level with the let's say with the setting of tonight's film. African animation film, though, is also the focus of his present research, which I hope, and I hope you will all hope with me, will result in a wonderful new book. But before then, we can welcome Boukary up to the lectern to talk to us about the film Little Senegal.
Good evening. How are you guys doing? Okay, finally, this is my first time staying in Frankfurt. It's always been a layover to somewhere else. So that's my first stay here. So first I would like to say some thank you notes. First to Vincent, who reached out to me and inviting me to this series. And I said, yes, I happily agree to come here. And thank you for your generous introduction. Sitting there, it's like, yeah, that's me. So for tonight's presentation, I would say in terms of structure, I'm going to take about, I would say, a third or two, I would say half of a presentation to focus first on the larger issue that Little Senegal raised. And then in the second part of the presentation, then I will zoom in on the film analysis itself. So, and also if, I don't know who the audience is, scholars, students. So I will say that my work here is at the intersection of film studies and area studies, specifically Black studies and African studies. On that note, let's get going. And the topic is the politics and affect of kinship in Little Senegal. And the 2001 film Little Senegal, directed by Rachid Boucharebs, a Senegalese immigrant named Hassan, confronts on a Harlem street a gang of African American he believes are responsible for robbing his apartment. As the confrontation escalates, Hassan shouts at one of the African American men, quote, "Do you have a job?" The men angrily respond by asking, quote, "Where are you from? Where are you from?" These two questions, one about economic employment and the other about national origin, encapsulates the film's thematic exploration of the often fraught relationship between African immigrants and African Americans in the 21st century. Both questions imply issues of belonging. The first one asks, are you a legitimate part of the workforce? The second question asks, are you a legitimate American? And underlying both questions is a deeper interrogation: what counts as authentic Blackness in the United States? Or in other words, who is Black in America? Although Little Senegal is now 23 years old, the issues it raises remain as current as ever. We can see them at work in cinema today when filmmakers choose to have non-American actors of African descent play African American characters. For instance, there was a backlash when the British actress and singer Cynthia Erivo was cast to play Harriet Tubman in the eponymous 2019 movie Harriet. Erivo was nominated for Best Actress at the 92nd Academy Awards. Similarly, some criticized the choice of British actor Daniel Kaluuya to play young African-American male in Jordan Peele's Get Out. A few years later, the casting of British actor David Oyelowo to play Martin Luther King in Selma likewise came under criticism. These actors understood themselves to be taking on a job, whereas the critics asked of them the same question that is asked of Hassan in Little Senegal. Where are you from? To doubt the legitimacy of these actors to play African-American roles is to raise the question, who gets to represent Blackness in America? Is the African-American experience so distinct, so historically specific, that it is now cut off from the rest of the Black diaspora that has been unfolding over the last 4 centuries? Little Senegal explores these questions through a story and a set of cinematic qualities that dramatizes the obstacles between African immigrants and African Americans, also at the same time implies a persistent kinship between these two groups. The film carries out this exploration by combining the personal and the political, cultural identity, and economic necessity. Little Senegal provides no easy answers, but ultimately it tips towards the conclusion that in the face of white racism, Black solidarity offers the best hope for people in the United States and beyond. 400 years of separation as a result of slavery have led African American as well as the Black diaspora around the world to establish historical and cultural reference different from those established by Africans. The African American experience has yielded a distinctive sense of Black identity, one shaped by generations of systemic oppression and disenfranchisement, which differs from the experience of Africans whose struggle involved colonialist oppression by European powers. Nonetheless, as Africans have arrived in the United States in increasing numbers, especially following the 1965 Alger Immigration and Nationality Act, the demographics of who counts as Black in America has become increasingly complex. This much is clear. The idea of Blackness in the United States requires a recalibration that takes into account groups beyond African Americans. The idea of Black solidarity has strong historical roots in this country. The Harlem Renaissance inspired the Negritude literary movement and provided intellectual foundation for decolonization and Pan-Africanism. Furthermore, the struggle for political independence and African nations and the 1960s civil rights in the United States were catalysts for transatlantic solidarity between Black people. Harlem has played a special role as a bridge between Africa and its diaspora. The decision of recent African immigrants to reside in Harlem has been based on several factors, including the community history as a center of Black culture and politics, as well as some shared identification of Blackness. Nonetheless, relations between Black American and Black immigrants have often been rocky. Some African Americans resent, and this is in quote, the model minority myth that is sometimes applied to immigrants. That is the mistaken idea that African migrants work harder than African Americans. This is sometimes tied to another sticking point between the two groups, specifically the accusation that Black immigrants steal jobs or take advantage of affirmative actions initiative that should be limited to American citizens. I should say on that point that has been, the Supreme Court has already dissented that. Furthermore, the historical role of Africans in the transatlantic slave trade represent a major obstacle for Black solidarity. And in truth, the subject is not substantively addressed on the continent. These issues, along with differing cultural trajectories of Black Africans, African Americans, and Afro-Caribbeans, have caused some commentators to voice doubt about the Black solidarity altogether. In her 2013 book, Black Ethnics, Christina Guillet denies the existence of a shared Black racial identity in the United States because of different Black ethnicities have divergent experiences. While these conflicts and differences are certainly significant, I think there is a deeper Black reality that underlines them. Whatever economic competition or ethnic differences may exist between African immigrants and African Americans, this does not end up protecting Black immigrants from racism in the United States. Anti-Black racism does not distinguish according to nationality. It persecutes equally African American, Black African, Afro-Caribbean, and any other shade of Blackness. The system of American racism does not care if I'm personally from Burkina Faso, because in its eyes, I'm just another Black body. With this fact in mind, Africans and African Americans can approach a conversation on the slave trade that acknowledges the historical role of African slavers without diminishing American culpability. Furthermore, although it's true that there are differences between various black ethnicities, I argue that the lines separating them are often blurred through intermarriages, with second and later generation identifying as Black American rather than their parents' nationalities. The American writer, activist, and academic Keeanga Yamata Taylor once asked regarding African American struggle against exclusion, what is it that we Black Americans are asking to be included into? What concept of American community are African Americans seeking to join? Prompted by this question, I ask the following. What are African immigrants asking to be included into? Is there a version of American blackness that will claim kinship with and welcome African blackness? Some people are inclined to answer in the negative, since African immigrants are not native-born citizens and do not share a history of enslavement and Jim Crow. Yet the legacy of Jim Crow has saddled African Americans with second-class citizenship. And in this respect, African immigrants share an important kinship with them. As immigrants, African migrants experience a diluted sense of civic belonging, ranging from second-class citizen to non-citizen. The dark skin deepen the secondary quality of a status in America, subjecting them to discriminatory treatment less often faced by white immigrants. African immigrants' doubly inferior status on the basis of race serves as a kind of reminder that anti-black racism still prevents African Americans from enjoying full and equal citizenship. Because of this, I contend that African immigrants have proximity to and solidarity with African American historical struggles against exclusion. In addition, the experience of Black solidarity travels not only from immigrant to American, but also from American to immigrant. America has deepened my perception of my own blackness. In fact, I would say that I was not black until I came to the United States. Growing up in Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire, I do not recall self-identifying as black or being assigned a black identity. Many other people across the continent will testify like me that blackness was not one of the identity markers, simply because my generation grew up in largely after the presence of a white colonial population has diminished or vanished. And I know you have a case of South Africa or Rhodesia, which is today Zimbabwe, that has a racial issue. But since coming to America, I have a sense of possessing black identity that transcends any particular continent, country, or ethnicity. This is a gift that America's provided, ambiguous though this gift sometimes seems to me. Now, moving on to the analysis of Little Senegal, the film. The film Little Senegal is set in the historically black neighborhood of Harlem around the Senegalese community. The film titles named after the eponymous Senegalese immigrant enclave located on 116th Street between Lennox Avenue and Frederick Douglass and West Harlem. Harlem is the location where most of the story unfolds in the film. Upon completion and before its theatrical release, Little Senegal was screened at the Apollo Theater in 2001, with free admission, where 1,000 African American and African immigrants came together to watch a movie that talks to and about them and their neighborhood. This was an attempt at fostering conversation and mutual understanding between black neighbors. and the entire film is aimed at the question of what kind of relations do and should exist between Black Americans and Black African immigrants. The protagonist, Alioune Guiré, works at a UNESCO World Heritage Site on Gorée Island, an embarkation point for natives transported during the slave trade. Learning that his ancestors were taken as slaves from this very location, he traveled to South Carolina and eventually in Harlem in an effort to track down his distant relatives. He stays with his nephew Hassan, a recent immigrant bitter about the discriminatory treatment he received from Black Americans, and Hassan's girlfriend, Biram, an African woman chafing against traditional Senegalese sexism. There is also a subplot about Hassan's friend Karim, who is trying to gain US citizenship through a sham marriage to an African-American woman named Amaryllis. Alioun's quest to find his distant cousin eventually lead him to a woman named Ida and her estranged pregnant granddaughter, Eileen. He set out to help them without telling them about the family relationship, and eventually a romance develops between the elders. However, after Hassan is killed, Alioune leaves Ida to take his nephew's body to Senegal. The film takes Harlem, an historical symbol of African presence in America, as the milieu in which to explore this relationship. Filmmakers and artists have often awarded Harlem this role. Restless City film came out in 2011 by Nigerian photographer turned filmmaker Andrew Dosunmu, is likewise set in Harlem Morningside Heights area. It dramatizes the experience of a 21-year-old aspiring Senegalese musician named Gibril, who is looking to realize his American dream but get caught in the underworld of drugs and prostitution through his African-American love interest, Trini. Restless City and Little Senegal, set in the 2000s, focused primarily on the experience of French-speaking West African immigrants who started moving to Harlem en masse in the early 1980s and also in the 1990s. Harlem as a metaphor for struggle, hustle, and pride in blackness function as a location as well as a character in the film. Film techniques of cinematography and sound, specifically music score, are made silent in both films. In terms of cinematography, the African presence in Little Senegal and Restless City is conveyed visually by shots of storefronts, particularly African hair-braiding salons, and the African square sign at the intersection of 125th and 7th Avenue. Portrayal of the physical presence of African immigrants is further showcased by the engagement with Harlem as they perform daily routines in their personal and professional life. Dosunmu, Restless City offers particularly compelling audiovisual storytelling in sequences that are seemingly juxtaposed with no smooth transition between them. As a result, the image construction of a story could be likened to a collage in which film and photography are enmeshed in a symbiotic relationship. The music score, with jazz as the dissonant music that accompanies most of the outdoor scenes, contribute to a portrayal of a hectic life these immigrants and African Americans might share in today's world. This technique helped to render the constructed nature of the reality of West Africans in Harlem. Little Senegal dramatizes a case of reverse ancestry tracing, since traditionally it has been African Americans who have journeyed to Africa to discover their roots, not Africans coming to the US to find theirs. This has been the case since the establishment of West African state of Liberia in 1847, continuing through Marcus Garvey's Return to Africa movement in the 1920s, all the way to present-day genealogy tourism. And reversing the usual quest structure of a search for ancestors, the film reimagines the relationship between Africa and the diaspora, positing a two-way mutuality in which both groups need each other to be complete. And if here I were to borrow the word of the concept of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan writer, I would say to remember, remembering, to be whole. This notion of mutuality is also conveyed in dualistic construction of couples, when African characters Alloun and Karim negotiating romantic relationship with Black American characters Aida and Amaryllis. Even Hassan and Biram, both Senegalese, fall into this immigrant versus American pattern, with Hassan maintaining a resentful distance from what he sees as a hostile American society, while Biram sneaks off to take English lessons. The uneven success of this romantic relationship symbolizes the inconsistent relationship between Black immigrants and Black Americans in the 21st century. A number of scenes in the film depict African American stereotypical perception of Africans or Africa, leading to friction between the on-screen characters. In one scene, Hassan, working as an auto mechanic, is verbally abused by an African American driver for what he sees as rough treatment of his car. Quote, "Get your hand off my car, you big ape, fucking African." In another scene, African American Amaryllis is frustrated with Karim for not knowing answers to questions on American history for his upcoming immigration interview. Karim shoots back at her, quote, "And what do you know about Africa?" Amaryllis replies, "I don't need Africa. You need America. It's your ass on the line." Most dramatically, as I mentioned at the beginning of his talk, Hassan's belief that African Americans have robbed him eventually lead to a violent altercation, resulting in his death. Conflicts such as these suggest that Africa and the diaspora are entangled from each other, and that Harlem history of Black internationalism is not enough to forge a racial solidarity in the present. Part of these conflicts, the film suggests, involve money. Hassan, in contrast to his girlfriend Biram, has a limited interest in bonding with African American culture because he's too focused on surviving in the American economy. Likewise, financial consideration trouble the emotional connection between Karim and Amaryllis, since he's paying her to pose as a future spouse. Quote, "If you lose your money, that will be your problem," she tells him. They eventually have to choose between a romantic relationship and a business partnership. Later on, Ida tells our protagonist Alloun that money is so important, but it makes race irrelevant. Quote, "Now there is no black and white. There is only green," referring to the dollars. In making economic concerns so divisive, Little Senegal points to the historical tension in which African Americans have worried that Black immigrants represent a competition for scarce financial opportunities. In this worry, African immigrants are not fellow Black citizens of the world, but rather foreigners intending to take the Black American jobs. Although plenty of elements in the film express skepticism about the prospect of Black solidarity, there is a constant underlying sense that African Americans and Black immigrants need each other in the way that a family needs all its various members to feel complete. For example, Alloun is a foreigner who has come into Ida's life only recently, and yet it is he who ends up serving as the glue that brings together Ida and her granddaughter Eileen. Although they are separated by the conclusion of the story, with Ida in Harlem and Alloun in Senegal, the final camera sequence juxtaposes a shot of Alloun looking out of a doorway toward the sea with a shot of Ida opening the door of her shop and walking outside. By filming the two characters in such similar poses, Little Senegal implies that Africa and the diaspora, although geographically distant, are nonetheless linked by a subtle kinship. Furthermore, the film argues for Black solidarity by reminding us in several ways that anti-Black racism affects African immigrants and African American alike. Although early in the film, Ida claims that, quote, "I don't much trust Africans." Later on, when a taxi refuses to stop for them, she tells Alloun, quote, "They're not going to take us. We're Black. We better take the subway." In other words, she recognizes the we of Black kinship in the face of white racism. In addition, Little Senegal features several scenes in which characters listen to news reports of real-life racially motivating killings, including the 1999 police shooting of Amadou Diallo, an unarmed 23-year-old Guinean student, and the 1998 Texan murder of James Byrd, an African-American dragged to death behind a Ford pickup by white supremacists. By observing that anti-Black racist violence does not care about national origin, the film makes its most powerful argument that racial solidarity offers the best chance for Black survival for both Black Americans and Black immigrants. 23 years ago, at the beginning of this century, Little Senegal pointed to the need for substantial and sustained dialogue between Africa and historical diaspora around the world. One that goes beyond roots tourism. In doing so, the film looks back at 21st century effort of Black internationalism and Pan-Africanism, much of which took place in the community of Harlem, where the story is set. Looking ahead, it's clear that the dialogue in this film asks for Looking ahead, it's clear that the dialogue this film asks for remain just as crucial today, as new configuration of Blackness in America has been prompted by the election of Barack Obama, the rise of social media, and the re-election of Donald Trump. Little Senegal inspires us to continue looking to Black diaspora cinema in creating transatlantic dialogues and in exploring Blackness in America's fast-changing demographics. On that note, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Boukary. And we'll break for 10 minutes before starting the film. And of course, there'll be an opportunity to discuss the film right after the screening with Boukary and you guys. All right. Well, those who want to stick around can join us to discuss the film. I maybe wanted to kick things off with a question for Boukary. I mean, it's a film that shows us the divisions between, you know, different members of this neighborhood, depending on their experience, depending on their generations as well, depending on their ancestry. But across these divisions, we do see the formation of, on a small scale level at least, a kind of community, I think, over the course of the film. I mean, do you think that's what the film is giving us? It's giving us the hope that communities can be formed across those kind of dividing lines?
I think the film strikes at the end is a positive note, so almost like a comedy where we have a resolution and we see Alloun returning to Senegal. We see Eileen accepting her motherhood and also reconciliation with her grandmother. And Karim and Amiralis starting over, not for papers. Yeah, so we have this kind of resolution. Now from those resolutions to maybe, I don't want to say jump and say that the community is coming together. Yeah, in the diegetic world of the movie, I would say yes. You know, okay, we have a resolution to the different threads and subplots. Now, if I were to step back and maybe put my hat over Harlemites living in the community in Harlem for 10 years now. So, yeah, we have even more increasingly number of African migrants who call Harlem their home. And if you get a chance, you know, could walk past 116th, which is known as Little Senegal, you see many young people who have crossed the southern border. Any time of the day, you will see like 300 people, you know, all along. You will think there's something going on. So there is Harlem as an anchor to not only Senegalese, but also to like Burkinabe community in terms of enclave. You see Malians, but the reality also is that you have gentrification. So, and that I will give one specific example. When I was doing research for my book, Africans in Harlem, an Untold New York Story, I did a lot of interviews on 116. Many of them has been there since the 80s. Some came, you know, the 90s. So, but none of them own property. They've been renting for 30, 40 years now. And now the price of real estate is up to the roof. They cannot afford it. So I think your question is community making, particularly diaspora community making. How that is possible if you don't have access to one of the three pillars of wealth building in the US? It's either, you know, if you're lucky enough that you get inheritance, yes. Otherwise, you know, you have to be an entrepreneur. If you're not an entrepreneur, you have to own property. And they don't own property. And renting is not an option. So my, you know, personal take is I'm afraid that Harlem might be a transient community where people come in a couple of years or months and then we have to, you know, they leave. Yeah. That's, you know, my fear, hopefully, that, you know, okay, I know there's quite a difference between, you know, Western Europe and, you know, the US, where in terms of safety net, social safety nets, it's different because in, you know, in New York, you have a rent stabilized and rent control apartment, but sometimes it's very difficult to get your hands on one. So,
yeah, I mean, this film, it gives us a snapshot of Harlem when it's still in the very early stages of this gentrification process. So it's really also showing, I think from the perspective of 2024, showing us a world that is in the process of being obliterated, in a sense. I mean, I think Ida's shop, for instance, is very much a kind of pre-gentrified commercial entity. It's, you know, it's got hand-drawn signs and so on. It's very artisanal in a sense. It's not like a, I don't know, it's not corporate America. So it's showing us this world that is still kind of, you know, at that historical moment, this is like Harlem is still in this state of kind of not yet going through the process that you've been describing. So in a sense, like, I don't think necessarily the filmmaker was 100% aware of the way he's capturing a time capsule for us in the future, but that's, I mean, that's the effect that the film had for me as a spectator from today.
Yeah, it's a kind of snapshot in time, while Harlem was at the time, and yeah, you see, you know, I mean, the fact that it shows that Harlem as a multi-ethnic Harlem beyond the narrative that is constructed around African Americans. That's, you know, definitely comes through, and but, you know, and I mean, I don't know how you guys think, you know, maybe take you to, in terms of the story construction. I don't know, whenever I watch this movie and get to the point where you have a romantic involvement between the two characters, I don't know about you, but I'm struggling to find the justification in the script. I know that's me. I'm not. I don't want to be judged. Judge the filmmaker.
I mean, between Alloun and Ida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to. I don't want to be on a white horse in terms of morality or the script. Writer perhaps. Okay. But I'm just curious. What's your take? Because it's been years. Whenever I watch it, I got to that point. I'm trying to find reason that can explicate this.
Can I ask why?
Yeah.
Can I ask why you find that?
Mm-hmm.
Can I find why you?
Yeah, Björn actually has a
Why?
roving microphone, so we can people can use that.
I said, can I ask as a beginning question? I mean, I have other questions later, but can I ask why you find it difficult? How you approach that scene? Can I?
Yeah. For me, what I find is that it's a little bit, for me, distracting to the main plot. And it doesn't add much for me. It doesn't add much to, the storytelling. And it's a little bit, distracting. That's, for me. And maybe, the director wanted, I don't want to, give intention to directors. Maybe, like in every quest journey, could a person get distracted or there is an unexpected twist, maybe.
I mean, it's a film that tries to weave several different plots or plot lines into each other or with each other. So you have different romances going on. You have different issues. You have the granddaughter, pregnancy. You have the death of Hassam at the end. So, there's a lot is narratively packed into this film, I would say. Perhaps it's a bit of a juggling act that the filmmaker has to kind of negotiate. But Didi, did you want to ask another question? Or?
Yeah, in the sense that I don't know if it's a clearly formulated question. This formulated sense, for instance, that I have, that the film leaves its basic premise unfulfilled. And I think also it's the dichotomy that is still at the heart of the so-called African American experience and how we approximate this film. Perhaps I am wrong, but I think that the film, what is at the heart of the film is what is African, African American, and how do you begin to make this distinction? What is this consciousness, or should we say double conscious, that an African American feels separate from what who an African is? So, and it's a troubling question that I think there is a tendency among African Americans and even Africans, and even, should I just say, there is this among black people and white people, to try to situate every black person in America as an African person. So I think it's a question which Africans and black people have not resolved. Who is an African and who is an American? So I think that there is this little dichotomy between this the ones who think of themselves as African Americans and the ones who are Africans. So I think it's an unresolved issue that the film leaves open, and that somehow a little bit with the romances and the relationship, because I think that this actually is the really driving force of the film, this dichotomy. Who is an African American and what is the relationship of an African American person to Africa? So, and because it's a question which black people in America have not posed to white people. Who is an American? Because black people came to America as slaves who were brought to America, but white people also came to America. White people did not grow from America. So if blacks came, white people also came. So why is it that black people are always still struggling to cling onto African, and the white people who also came to America are not clinging to where they came from? So I think it is this same debate. I think the film tends to I mean, Sutigo Kuyate for me is one of the greatest African actors ever. I always like Sutigo, and I think in this, his performance embodies this dichotomy. So, which I think the film tends to skip somehow. So, what is this double conscious? From this film now, who is an American, who is an African, and what does it mean to be an African American, and what does it mean to be an African in this film?
I'm going to, to say something. It's being recorded, so I will get in trouble because years later this will be. Yeah, I think in your comment you mentioned how Africans came as slaves and up to 100 years later still second-class citizen, and you have let's say the Mayflower, and then much later the Americans. I think the word is simply put white supremacy. So, and the question, in other words, is who is America for? Whose country is it? Who decides, who decides who is American and who decides who is not American? I think that's the core. And up to now, you have I think for me it's, white supremacy. And the second part of your comments, which is the relation between, what is the relation between Africa and the diaspora, or the diaspora? Yeah. Yes, and that, to be honest with you, I think that question, we haven't even scratched the surface. We only have like cyclical, I would say, encounters and exchanges. I mentioned the Harlem Renaissance and Negritude movement, or even what they call solidarity movement, the intersection of African struggle for independence and the 1960s civil rights movement. You have, like cyclical movements like this, and once it's passed, and then nothing happens. And also, if you take on the continent, I think it was 2019. Yes, 2019. You have 400 years of slavery in America, and you have the New York Times who run a special issue. But on the continent, except Ghana, who did the year of return, and then there was no mention. I'm just saying that we haven't engaged that question. And also when you talk about slavery, it's always the transatlantic, but also we know the Indian Ocean one. And to stop there, I will add the character of Killmonger in Black Panther. You guys remember when he was saying that, when he said, hey, you know what? You have vibranium, and you have, a lot of black people in the diaspora suffering. So you need, to go out and free your people, which is the one train of thought, in the diaspora, speaking to, yeah.
Vincent? Yeah.
Someone who got the hand up. Oh,
right. Yes. So yeah, we'll come to you afterwards.
Okay, I'll just briefly add to or pick up from what Didi was raising. But first of all, I want to say, what a stunningly beautiful film. And what a pleasure and privilege to be able to see it in a really well-preserved print on this screen. How amazing that film looked and sounded and felt. So I just thought that was great. So thank you for picking it. I'm an easy prey, but for me the love stories work. I have absolutely no problem understanding what's happening. Just to clear up that point, she's lonely. He's a good-looking man. He's attentive. They fall in love. That's okay. Works for me. But it also addresses a thematic point, I would say, because the whole film is about the question of belonging. Who belongs to whom? Where? What kinds of communities can you build? And the love relationship obviously is a very strong one. I want to pick up from one thing that Didi said and in a way turn it on its head. What you could say, you could make a point that the film tells the story of the Europeanization of the African diaspora, in that it tells the story of someone who sets out to build a coherent genealogy for someone who lives in the U.S. In my experience, so-called white Americans are very conscious of their ethnic origins and often have those kinds of genealogies ready. They will be able to tell where their grandparents were from. They're interested in tracing their genealogies back, and they can do it because there are immigration records that are easily available, and you don't have to do the kind of detective work that the main character in this film has to go through. And one of the things that has happened, and you need to enlighten us on this and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a film that's now almost a quarter of a century old. And one of the big things that has happened since then is that DNA genealogy testing has become a major business, but also something that is relatively cheaply available to everyone. And, I mean, the film starts out with a portrait of, you know, as you were describing it, American heritage tourists, African Americans who travel to Africa to visit the sites of the transatlantic slave trade. And one of the things that has become hugely popular is people tracing their genealogies through their DNA. Which, in the case of African Americans, of course, is a substitute for the missing records. It creates stories of descendants and of belonging that the other immigrant communities in the U.S., and they're all immigrants, have more readily available. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts about the role of genealogies in this narrative and in what has happened since.
I think that this is, like you said, this is a growing business, and now and you have you know, the Harvard professor. You know who I'm talking about?
You're talking about Elizabeth Warren.
No, yeah, no. Huh? Henry James, yes. Yes, yeah, Skip.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, Skip, who you know can have you know shows that he does about it. So he has grown very popular. Used to be kind of, I don't want to say kind of from the elite, and now you know he has descended to the masses level, to the point that I should say it. Okay, to the point that you have many countries that are pushing in terms of policies at the governmental level to capture what is bubbling to the surface. I know I mentioned earlier Ghana, instituting the year of return, and I think we did again a year or something, the second year. And give one example. Is there any Beninese in the room here? No, okay. So you have, Benin that, now is pushing to open its country to the diaspora. Because in Ghana, you have the right to abode, which is, you are from the diaspora, you can come and claim, citizenship. You have a similar approach that is being, done by Benin. I'm just saying that for as an offshoot from the genealogy or heritage tourism, on the other end, on the continent, you have many countries that really are positioning themselves, I don't say to profit, to take, to capitalize on it. And also we see movie stars, African American movie stars and sportsmen who goes to a country, get a passport, and for that country sees that as publicity advertising. So it's kind of, I don't say win-win, but we see the growth on on the diaspora part, but also on the continent, how the continent is positioning some countries to take advantage of it. I'll take the case of Burkina Faso. I think a couple of years ago, you have one rapper, not really famous, that move to Burkina Faso, and you have a big welcoming ceremony at the airport, because everybody's like, oh yeah, you know, the African American are returning home. So basically helping put your country on the map. And I totally, you know, agree with you that unlike white immigrants in the US that can trace their genealogy through immigration records, for Black Americans, simply that option was not usually available, as the movie showed. Had not been the tenacity of the character Alloun, I don't think, you know, Ida and the rest would have, you know, taken advantage of it.
With the Alloun, I mean, there's this moment early in the film where he says to these two African-American tourists, your past begins here. And they're kind of crying. And it is a very profound statement. On the other hand, it seems like it's also kind of a pre-manufactured statement that he's giving to them. That's almost like a tourism slogan or something. Like it works on them, but there's also something that's a little bit artificial about the statement itself, that kind of, and also the way he delivers it. And then I just want to ask you, like, I mean, also, in the end, he comes back to Senegal. I mean, is he rejecting this idea of America? Is that is he, this idea of, oh, everyone's welcome? It's like, no, he doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to be part of that. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. How do you read the ending? How do you read the fact that he comes back to Senegal at the end of the film?
For me, I read it as a mission accomplished, because I see it like a spiritual journey that he was on. Like I said, you know, he saw this many times in his dreams, that he has to go and track down his distant relatives. He did his job, and then he has to return home. And now the circumstances under which he returns home, the director decided that, you know, his nephew dies, and then takes the body home.
Yes, that's back.
All right, thank you. Double aspects theory, double consciousness. Interesting that this was actually propounded by Du Bois. I'm going to talk about a lot of things, so please excuse me. First of all, I'll throw a bit to Didi when you talked about the fact that, you know, even America had the white guys as immigrants. It's interesting to know that the original Americans from the Wild Wild West and Canada and the whole of North America, a lot of them were killed, and what is actually remained, the remains of them, is usually basically the names of their towns: Iowa, Ottawa, Saskatchewan. You know, you're beginning to hear all of those names that are not English. So those are just basically the remains. So a bit, I'll also throw a bit to the fact that maybe the blacks were a bit on the side of not getting killed, or they are strong enough just to remain up till today. I mean, the Indians, the Red Indians, as some people call them, the wild guys, are not basically not in existence. Now, coming to double aspect theory or double consciousness. Now, I feel a lot of double things was happening in the film. Let me start with music. I was hearing a lot of harmonica and violin, something that suggests you know, the Western film, the cowboy. It was a bit repulsive for me. I mean, listening to that kind of music in this kind of film. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. The music felt like it's going to be a cowboy, some shootings, and you know, you get what I mean. And when you begin to see or hear these harmonica and then the violin, do you know the kind of music they play in, you know, those Western films, and then you see horses running, the California, you know the kind of film. That kind of music was quite a lot in the film. Which makes it a bit thumbs down a bit. I don't know, still talking about double, if there's anything double about that in terms of consciousness. And then at some point I noticed that the gentleman, I mean, he was on a mission, and then of course he experienced so many other things, and then at the point where his nephew dies, I assume that they are supposed to be Muslims, and then his body is, you know, kept in a casket, which is very not typical of Muslims. Muslims will never keep bodies in casket. Okay. Could it also be some double consciousness going on there? Okay, they are not sure where to really place this guy after his death, and then a bit of throw immediately after his death. The music that came on again was the kind of old Christian Adventist kind of music when people die, was the song that came on. Also a bit confusing because this fellow that just died is supposed to be an African Muslim. And then in the end, when he was buried, because this is a film, and film, I believe to a very large extent should be or could be historical sources. Now, in history, somebody 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line will see this film and would not understand the symbolism. He would have gotten a wrong information as to how a Muslim man is buried. And then at the point he returns to Africa, he is buried close to water. Usually in many African societies, there are reasons where people are buried close to water. There are reasons where we bury people on the hills. There are reasons why, you know, there are different reasons for these burial rites and how people are buried. There's a kind of person that we're buried in a common ground. There's a kind of person that we're buried, you know, in this kind of, there's a lot of that goes around that burial and things like that. And then this gentleman at some point begin to do something that is a bit very African, which is also a double aspect or a double consciousness of between him being a Muslim or being a typical African, and how an African would do those kind of things when people, you know, are buried. Another thing that I noticed is his relationship with his nephew. There was just a lot of things that were going on. Was it deliberate, or do we just begin to point this out and question the double consciousness that's going on in there? A lot of things were kind of not, especially in terms of symbolism, in terms of the music, and then, you know, coming back home, what was the essence of that? I mean, okay, first of all, technically the film, for every new thing that's going to happen, I noticed there's always a very wide shot that, you know, keeps maybe the most important person or the ship, for example, on the role of third, which I expect, or which I believe is a story that the filmmaker was trying to tell. And this happened all up until the part where, you know, we just had this gateway of, you know, the box of, you know, that this gentleman was looking through. And of course, we'll say that the other side of the sea or the Atlantic Ocean is, you know, America, for example. And I mean, I see all of this technical part, the colors, the art direction, they're very good, very amazing. But music and symbolism and a bit of the religious things that went on there is a bit confusing and maybe also misleading. I'd like you to make some comments about this and basically, thank you.
Okay, you said a lot of things. Yeah, because I'm trying to find a full line. So I think your main point is in you pointing out some, according to you, some inconsistencies in the movies, in the movie. And for that, I think the filmmaker is the best person to answer that, because there are some aesthetic choices that I think that only he and his crew can answer to that. Because I'm a little bit always reluctant to kind of rewrite a movie. So, you know, okay, you have a director, so you are entitled to the storytelling, because otherwise we get into the realm of, the whole debate is movie supposed to reflect, I don't say life exactly, or how much freedom and creativity is afforded to, the storyteller. And that also I understand that, okay, in terms of some historical facts or certain things you have to stay true, but at the same time also, on music part, I think I personally remember mostly jazz, more than anything. So that's what I can share on this one.
I just maybe want to ask, following on from that, Rachid Bouchareb is an Algerian filmmaker.
French-Algerian.
He would have had obviously his own experience of colonialism and a kind of diasporic existence, but it's still a culturally very different framework in his own life compared to what he's depicting on the screen. So that's also a very delicate matter then that he has to kind of grapple with, right? He has to get, he has to be very careful about getting the kind of cultural nuances correct, I would guess. Otherwise he opens himself up to that kind of criticism.
Yeah.
About, kind of what is accurate and what is inaccurate and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I would say Rachid Bouchareb is one of the few filmmakers out in, I would say, African of African origin whose work is consistently about the encounter. The encounter, because you have this film, you have also London River. I don't know how many of you have seen London River. Also, you have Sotiku Kouyaté playing that, and also about the encounter of the people from different religion and racial background, London River. You have Days of Glory. Anyone seen it? Days of Glory. Also, the tirailleurs, African, infantrymen going to France and fight during the Second World War. So he has his work is you can see that's a running thread of, going to meet the other, and obviously the risk is that you are stuck in a kind of binary and dualistic framework, and also you can be open to criticism about how accurately you portray the other or didn't do it. But that, definitely his work is traversed by, the meeting of different cultures, different people from different backgrounds.
Further questions from the audience? Didi. Maybe I can just give you this mic.
I'm struggling to actually frame it as a question, because I think also when the dust settles, black people will be accused of enabling Donald Trump. So when the dust settles, they will start looking for scapegoats. So black people will be one of the people who will be held responsible for enabling Donald Trump. So, and I think that, for me, the driving point for me for the film is this beautiful synergy between Sotiku Kouyaté's character and the woman.
Aida.
So yeah, Aida. So so I really liked that. So it worked for me very well. I think they embody the movie for me. The one who thinks of herself as American also, and the one who thinks that you have to go back to the root to where you are coming from. And I think it boils down to this. What I think is also becoming more and more. If you also check, for instance, more and more African artists in the UK, say, for, should I say, after the Windrush generation, so second, like, who are considered around the works of Ritwik Katak. If you check the works of Coco Fusco and John Akonfra, Isaac Julian, works around the question of memory in terms of colonial memory, identity, and all that. So this actually is also a film I would really like to show in Nigeria, because this is a film I think would like to provoke conversation, considering this ongoing debate. What is diaspora culture? So I think it goes to also the heart of what is Black Atlantic theory, what is Black Atlantic culture? So is it specifically African, or is it a hybrid culture that could stand on its own, separate from Africa? So I point this not necessarily to ask you a question, because like me, you are a scholar, you are not the person, you have not authored this film, so we are simply approaching how we can use this film also to trigger debate concerning the Black identity, the African and diasporic culture. What is their point of intersection, and how each can stand on its own? So is it necessary for the one to be related to the other? So I think it's just it's not necessarily a question, like I said. So it's really just a point of really troubling the question. So we cannot just leave it standing on its own, so as if it is solved. So.
No, it's not solved. And I wanted to throw back the question to you, which is the question is, who is African? Very simple. Who is African today, and what is Africa? It's simple, because I will just convoke, three, because you talk about how to bring it back to Nigeria and pursue, because if you go back, I forget the name of the successor of Nelson Mandela, the South African president. He's the one that, Thabo Mbeki. Yeah, he started the conversation of who is African, with, then, came to the African Renaissance. I think, we, can start there, because now, if you want to contextualize it in present day, Africa, for the last 3 to 4 years, we have a rise of, some will call it the second independence in Africa, where you have, military junta, you have civic and youth organization claiming that we want real, I would say, independence, whatever that means. I think that that's a way, maybe to start from that point. But and then I could bring more thinkers like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, because the question when say basic Africa, he talks. He doesn't talk much about Black Atlantic, but he talks about through his concept of remembering, like members. So remembering Africa, so bringing the diaspora and the continent, and also you have the African Union that have added the diaspora as its 5th region, because of the African Union you have goes by the 4 geographic region, east, west, south, north, and they added the 5th, which is the diaspora. It's very interesting in conceptually, because all the 4s are geographical locations, but the diaspora is more diffuse. So which means that even on the continent you have that, or at least that movement out incorporating the diaspora. But it would be interesting on the perspective of the historical, diaspora. How do they feel? They feel included, or they don't? Would they want to be included in what is Africa, and what Africa is it for them?
We have a question here, and then I think one up the back here. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. So my question is, what happens to the character of Biram? Everybody talks about, the man, everything that's happening. She's a woman that was, I think, under diaspora. She was, would I say, still under the oppression of racism and the whole confusion. And then she had to still submit under patriarchal power. It's like she didn't have so much to say. I really want, maybe you could just share more light, because I saw 2 different, African women, right? By the time the character of the other lady, that's
Amarales?
yeah, was talking, and I was like, "Ooh, that's not African." And then you remember the main character trying to say, "I am your relative." You know, they want to impose that patriarchal hegemony. But so what happens to Biram after Hassan is gone? Because she's trying to, you know, she's a woman in diaspora trying to find her way, the struggle and all that.
Yeah, I think for the character of Biram, it's represent, I don't want to say, I'm not a specialist in feminism. I'm trying to think, is it, you know, the second generation or the third generation of feminism? Anyway, maybe someone will correct me, which is about more economic empowerment. And this situation, we see that her, and at the end, she said, you know what? I've been serving you all the time. Who's going to serve me? And prior to that, we see that she has been secretly taking English lessons because he has an ambition that goes beyond just being a household, you know, wife. And that's, you know, the question, and that's also bring the side question of what are the levers that women can pull in terms of upward social mobility in the diaspora. And obviously in this case is, you know, education that is, you know, presented as that upward mobility levers that women can pull. And also I can also link it to double consciousness. He mentioned W. Du Bois, which is basically for African Americans, not Africans, not Americans. We can add it for African immigrants. We can even add it, a third one is maybe triple consciousness. Not, you know, for many, they left Africa, not Africans when they go back, not Americans. Yeah. And then, you know, maybe, you know, for not Amarales, for Biram is, she's a woman. And then we clearly see sexism and, like you said, patriarchal hegemony on her, which means it's another layer of burden that she carries, and she has to try to unshackle herself from that, which means that compared to men, she has to face even, I don't know, triple obstacles. Yeah.
All right, up the back here, there's a question.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to echo that the film was very beautiful, and I really enjoyed watching it. I have a question, another question, maybe an observation, and I ask you to play on it or maybe share your thoughts about it, which is the special relation to the paper. So in the beginning, there's this kind of detective work that was mentioned, to read between the lines or read against what is written there and read like a different history into the record. But there's also this weird need for papers in order to be able to stay in the US. So there's kind of the paper shapes also the identities of the diaspora in a weird way. But also the identity that is written down on the paper is kind of threatened. It's not really as fixed as it appears to be, as like the old names that are being brought into play then show. So I don't know, I just had to think about this relation maybe between the diaspora and the paper and the census, or like the records, and the ability to read between the lines and read a different history into them that not everyone is able to see or to decipher.
Yes, it's another example of a duality. When papers literally, like Karim, he needs papers to stay in the US. So the question of, at one point I used to call it the administrative identity, the one that you have on papers, that you need to stay legally in the global North, and then the cultural identity that show you, grow up, and that's maybe identification. So you have that part of it. And also you have, in terms of written records, we can see the protagonist, doing his archival work. And then, okay, we have against the backdrop of, but you know, okay, in that culture, or at least in that community, there is no established written record. So you have, you know, those juxtaposition of archival work where you have records, and yet you have no African names, like he said, like everything is kind of just homogeneous. And at the same time, in that community, so a little written record, but not much of an use, even if in some instances he has been able, you know, to track down, but at the same time also a community that need that anchor. I think that's what I can say about this.
I thought it was interesting that right at the end, one of the lines, I don't think really comes through in the French subtitles, though, because when you're saying like no love or no papers, and Curryman says no papers, but in the French it says sans papier, which is like, I mean, that's a political movement in France, right? The sans papier, the immigrants who don't have papers, who don't have an official status in France, but they're kind of politically organized to kind of establish their legitimacy there. It was interesting, at least, that the word sans papier appeared on the screen at that moment. But we have maybe this will be our last question, because we are kind of
I also feel that I feel that the film also had a lot of resonance. For example, the lady, I mean, a lot of young black ladies can actually see themselves in her, and her story is also almost like a true life story.
Like Eileen. Just
no.
Ida?
Is it Ida, the wife of the taxi driver?
Yeah. Biram.
Yeah.
Biram.
So I think our story is as a bit close to the story of Buchi Emecheta, who, yes, if I'm not wrong, who was a writer, and you know, after she wrote her first book, the manuscript was burnt and destroyed by her husband, who didn't want her to, you know.
That Fatou Diom.
No, Buchi Emecheta, a Nigerian writer that wrote The Joys of Motherhood.
Oh, okay.
Things like that. So I see a Buchi Emecheta in that. I mean, that resonates in terms of that. And then, of course, the people that the man trying to trace or help another person trace their, you know, family line, just like Professor Edgar had, you know, talked about, you know, the DNA thing. Another resonance, of course, again, is what you just mentioned, and you know, people coming to the global north, you know, trying to, you know, get their way around, and this is usually between, you know, love or paper. And I mean, there are bits and pieces all around the film, all around entirely, that has a lot of resonance that one can relate to, in terms of, is either it is your story, or it's something that you know has happened to someone close to you, or something you've read about. It's not, you know, nothing is absolutely strange, and then it is a beautiful, you know, well told story in terms of, I mean, human story in terms of this, you know, double consciousness.
Yeah, in terms of, I mentioned Fatou Diom, this is a celebrated French Senegalese writer, and real life story. You know, she moved to France and married a French, you know, person, and then got divorced. And she said, okay, her own story is that she wrote her first novel, and then her ex-husband basically burned everything down, and then she has to write again. So being in the global north and trying to make it as a woman against many odds.
All right, maybe we'll leave it at that. Would like to once again thank Boukary for insightful lecture and an excellent discussion after the film. I think it really unpacked a lot of layers to the film, so I'm very appreciative of that. We'll be back again next week with Vincent and Didi again, talking on the film. Remind me, because there was a change in the film program. So not Amina, but Confucian Nava. The slight late change in the program there. But it'll be an excellent screening and an excellent event. Yeah.
Another very beautiful film.
Another very beautiful film. They're all beautiful films. We don't program anything that's not beautiful in this series. So yeah, see you all next week then.
Thank you.